The urinary system, from the microscopic urinary tubes of the kidneys to the larger transport passageways that carry urine from the kidneys, is a series of tubes. Recall that the basic anatomy of a tube, which was covered in an earlier presentation, consists of a wall comprised of 3 structural layers or tunics. From deep to superficial, the structural pattern of tubular anatomy consists of an internal layer, typically comprised of an epithelial tissue and an associated vascular connective tissue, a middle layer that consists of variable combinations of smooth muscle and connective tissue, and an external layer, typically consisting of a variably thick, dense, irregular, fibroelastic connective tissue. All tubes in the body follow this basic pattern, which we will now apply to the anatomy of the urinary system. Let's begin with an overview of the tubes of the urinary system. Beginning at the point where the tubes exit the body, let's follow them back toward the kidney. Following this progression, the tubes include the urethra, the bladder, which is a much expanded portion of the tubular passageways, the ureter, which we will now zoom in on as it approaches the kidney, where it expands to form the renal pelvis. Projecting from the renal pelvis into the kidneys are the major calyces, which branch into minor calyces. Projecting from each minor calyx are a large number of microscopic collecting ducts, arranged in a pyramidal shape. As each collecting duct projects towards the cortex of the kidney, it gives rise to numerous branches that continue in the following sequence: a distal convoluted tubule, a nephron loop, a proximal convoluted tubule, and a glomerular capsule. The small tubes within the kidneys form an intimate interface with the circulatory system to function as the site of urine production, while the larger tubes transport the urine to the bladder for temporary storage until it is convenient to void it through the urethral drain. Like all tubes, the urinary tubes have 3 structural layers or tunics. Let's begin by examining the basic tunic pattern of the urinary tubes on both an illustration and an actual photomicrograph. The internal layer of the urinary tube is named the tunica mucosa, and it has 2 subdivisions. The innermost portion of the mucosa is the epithelial layer, which is comprised of transitional epithelium, also referred to as urothelium. This deformable stratified epithelium presents a protective barrier to impede reabsorption of the nitrogenous waste being evacuated from the kidneys. The kidneys work hard to rid the body of the nitrogenous wastes, and the stratified epithelium does not allow the wastes to be reabsorbed into the blood as it is leaving the system. Beneath the epithelial layer is a thin lamina propria comprised of loose connective tissue. The middle layer of the tubular wall, the tunica muscularis, is a layer of smooth muscle tissue. Because the urinary tubes are transport tubes for urine, it is logical to have a muscular middle layer to compress the tubes and move the urine out of the body. The muscle fibers are arranged in 2 layers: an inner layer with longitudinally oriented fibers, and an outer layer with circularly oriented fibers. The fibers work in concert to produce peristalsis, the coordinated contractions that narrow and shorten the tubes to move the urine out of the body. Let's observe this process on the diagrammatic representation of a urinary tube. The external layer of the urinary tube is named the tunica adventitia. The tunica adventitia is a thin layer of loose to dense irregular connective tissue that distributes blood vessels to the tube. We see then that the pattern of a urinary tube, like all the tubular systems of the body, is a 3-layered tube. Let's examine the urinary tubes and see how their structure relates to the 2 primary functions of the urinary system: urine production and urine transport. From the minor calyces to the urethra, the urinary passageways function as transport tubes, or in the case of the expanded tubular bladder, as a convenience organ to temporarily store the urine until it is convenient to void it from the body. The structural wall of these transport tubes follows the pattern that we just examined. That is, a protective lining to impede reabsorption and a muscular middle layer to transport the urine along the tubes. Modifications to the basic urinary tube pattern occur in the small tubes, projecting from the minor calyces toward the peripheral cortex of the kidneys. These small tubes, numbering more than 1.25 million per kidney, lose the middle and outer layers of the tubular wall and reduce the mucosal lining to a simple epithelium consisting of a single cuboidal to squamous cell. In other words, very thin-walled tubes. This large number of thin-walled tubes forms an intimate association with a portal network of capillaries to filter and regulate the blood. The first capillary network is the glomerulus, a ball of capillaries that projects into the glomerular capsule. This is the site of filtration, where a significant amount of plasma is filtered from the blood into the urinary tubes. The second capillary network, the peritubular capillaries, surrounds the remaining small urinary tubules, through which the filtrate is slowly moving. This capillary network is the site of reabsorption, where much of the fluid lost during filtration is returned to the blood. During this process of filtration and reabsorption, excess water and nitrogenous wastes, the byproduct of protein metabolism, are removed from the blood. When the filtrate reaches the minor calyces, the tubular walls are too thick to allow further exchanges, and the fluid is then called urine, which is then transported from the body through the larger urinary tubes. So once again, we see another tubular system that follows the structural pattern of tubular anatomy and modifies that pattern to form an intimate interface with the circulatory system to monitor and maintain the water environment of the body.